Yeah, hello everyone and welcome to the Zurich Resilience Solutions webinar and podcast programme. This is a series of special webinars focusing on key road safety and motor risk issues. I'm joined today by Commander Carl Gordon from the National Police Chiefs Council Roads Policing Portfolio. For those that haven't met me, my name's Alan Thompson. I'm a risk consultant, a motor risk consultant with Zurich Resilience Solutions. So basically today is about discussing the current critical issue, which is approaching Christmas, and Operation Limit, which is the annual festive drink drug driving campaign that's delivered nationally. So Kyle, if I can introduce you and say, please, what is it, I suppose, that the campaign does and how it's focused and what drives success?
Thanks, Alan. Thanks, everybody, for listening. So the question you started off with is a really excellent one. What is the purpose of this operation? In short, it is to save lives. It is to protect the public. If today is an average day in the United Kingdom, 5 people who set out this morning won't be coming home tonight. If today is an average day in the United Kingdom, every 17 minutes, probably during the length of this podcast, somebody will be killed or seriously injured on our roads. And what that amounts to is over 1,600 people being killed last year, who, as we approach this festive time, and it is worth reflecting at a point in time in the year whenever we do tend to think about family and loved ones and those that are nearest and dearest. This year, as we get around those tables and as we go visiting each other and spend time with each other, it is worth bearing in mind that in the United Kingdom, one of the most developed countries in the world, simply by going about your daily business on the road, over 1,600 people will not be gathering this year that gathered last year. And Alan, that's the main reason and the main purpose for this. Of course, what we'll get into is what is up limit and why do we focus on drink and drugs? And I'm more than happy to take any of those questions. But that, along with all the other operational policing activity we take place and wider activity with partners, is ultimately to protect individuals, families and communities from the harm that has become all too common on our roads.
No, I mean, thanks very much. I mean, I think, you know, when we start looking and we talk about that number of people, there seems to be a complacency and an acceptability around loss in road death in this country. So how successful can these campaigns truly be, do you think?
So it's a really good question and one we have been asking for a period of time. So the reason up limit, that we call it up limit because of the limit in your system of alcohol before you become illegal to be on the road. But the reason up limit is now a national campaign is to answer exactly the question that you have just posed, Alan. We always knew that for many, many years, we in policing right across the United Kingdom, had enhanced activity in the run-up to the festive period for all sorts of reasons, not least of which is parties and get-togethers at work and with families, and people potentially moving around on our roads with alcohol and more laterally with drugs in their system. And 3 years ago, we decided for the first time ever to make this a national campaign with national structures, regional and local leads. And part of the reason we did that was because we could then draw in the data to have a look at how successful this was. And whilst I won't go into the exact figures because there's only a correlation, we haven't yet been able academically to prove a causation. What I can tell you is that the 3 years that this campaign has been running nationally with the activity and with all the messaging around it, we have seen not just a drop in collisions involving alcohol and drugs throughout the month of December when we've been on the road, but we've also experienced that halo effect into January and February, where those months as well have seen a reduction in the amount of people that we have detected or the amount of people who have been involved in collisions or offences with drugs and alcohol on board. So we can't say yet for certain just how successful it is, but what we can say is we definitely believe that these national campaigns are having an effect and keeping people safe on our roads.
And I think that for me, Carl, is one of the probably the critical issue is about the safety while using our roads, and certainly something that, you know, affects almost everyone daily. So what are the current risks to driving on our roads if we're talking about that number of people that could be incapacitated by drugs or alcohol?
Yeah, so if we go to the drugs and alcohol first, simply because that's the focus of this webinar, and then we can go slightly wider. So the risks around this are unfortunately persistent, and in some cases seem to be increasing. So we know from the last couple of years that when we test at the roadside, roughly 10% of those people that we test are testing positive for alcohol in the system. So that's 1 in every 10 stops. When it comes to drugs in the system, we are seeing a hit rate of 50%. Now, there's reasons why we have a much greater hit rate with the drug testing in terms of when we do it and how we do it, and it being potentially more targeted. But that gives you an indication of just how much alcohol and drugs is out there on our roads day in and day out. And of course, there'll be people who think that this is, you know, a victimless crime. You know, have a drink, smoke something, get into a car, and sure, it'll be fine. What we can tell you from government statistics is that 20% of all of the fatal collisions on our roads every year is caused by somebody who is impaired through drugs or alcohol. Think about that. That's a fifth of all of the fatal collisions in our roads are taking place because of irresponsible and selfish behaviour from people who are quite prepared for their own selfish reasons to put other road users in danger. Now, if I was to ask you the question and say, maybe you're a member of a local shooting club or gun club, if I was to say to you, how many drinks do you think you can have before you should wander out into the public domain with a gun, with a firearm, you would think there's something wrong with me. But yet the public at large think it's, not the public at large, thankfully, sorry, there are sections of the public who think it's completely acceptable to take a couple of drinks or to take drugs onto your system and get into a 2.5 ton vehicle made of metal and rubber and to drive it down a public road and to put other road users in danger in a way that if they were to put it in another context, they just wouldn't do. 20% of all fatal road traffic collisions caused by people who selfishly think this is acceptable. And more worryingly than that, we're seeing reported from all 43 forces across England and Wales, and in fact from Scotland and Northern Ireland as well, that the forces are reporting to us that drug driving is becoming one of their most pressing concerns. A younger demographic involved in the drug driving, it's predominantly male, it's predominantly 18 to 25-year-olds involved in this kind of selfish activity who think it is completely acceptable to take these substances and then get into a vehicle. So I think the statistics stand for themselves, and your listeners will hear this, and if they think about it properly, they'll understand it. But let me reframe it one last way, if you would, Alan. All of your listeners will have a close circle of either family or friends. And what I often ask people to do is, if you think that these statistics are an acceptable level and it's just the price we pay for being on the road, I want you to picture for a second that family or that circle of friends that you have. I want you to imagine their faces one by one. Then I want you to do something for me that nobody should ever have to do. Pick one of them. Pick any of them. And accept that by this Christmas, when you get together with family and friends, they'll be missing because they are an acceptable statistic on our roads. Just pick one of them, any one of them, and you tell me that you would be happy for that seat to be vacant, because driving on our roads is invariably dangerous and we should accept a certain level of carnage, because I don't believe that. I don't believe there's any other area of public policy that we would permit an acceptable level of harm to this extent. And I would ask your listeners and the wider public to reflect on that as they think about their own behaviour, and not just their own behaviour, but about those that would get into a driver's seat or walk towards a car with a set of keys in their hand this festive period.
Yeah, stark reality, Carla. I mean, and I suppose it leads me on to, you know, how do police officers identify drivers that may have drunk or taken substances that they shouldn't before driving? Because, you know, one of the things we do see less police officers out there. So how do we get to this and tackle this problem then?
It's a really good question, Alan. And of course, there's a range of scenarios in which police will end up testing somebody at the roadside. So one part of our campaign this year and in the last couple of years has been to encourage the public at large and close circles of family and friends to report somebody who they believe might be putting themselves and others in danger. And of course, that's going to lead to certain emotions from people listening to this who are of the old school, where you don't snitch on your friends or where you don't pick up a phone and report. But we know that the public at large do. Crime Stoppers has received over 45,000 calls in relation to this during the last campaign. So the public are prepared to reach out and let us know when somebody's causing danger. And of course, for those that would say to me, well, you don't report on your friends, you don't tell the police when somebody's about to do that. As long as you're happy to live with the consequences of what happens statistically when that person is involved in a serious or fatal road traffic collision thereafter, then that's something you have to live with. So, of course, we get the reporting by the public and we encourage that. But, of course, we can stop any vehicle on a public road at any time. The law in the United Kingdom is quite clear. We don't need a reason for it, and we often do. At this time of the year, you will see a lot of static checks where the police will put up a static check, and you won't be able to get through that without speaking to the officer involved. If your vehicle commits any sort of a moving road traffic offence, we can pull the vehicle in and we can start to look for signs and symptoms of anybody who might be impaired through drink or drugs. And of course, if you're involved in a collision, whether or not you are the person who are responsible for the collision, whether you're the injured party in it, if you're involved in a road traffic collision, you will be tested. So what I would say to those listening to this is there's a whole range of ways in which policing can carry out these tests. And the chances of you getting away with it, even if you think you're seeing less and less police, are diminishingly small. And when you take the amount of stops we did last year, and you take the fact that we're detecting 1 in 10 for drink and 1 in every 2 for drugs, my message is really, really clear. It is not worth it. Even if you're just approaching this from a selfish self-preservation point of view, it's not worth it for your license, for your continued employment, or your criminal record. It's not worth it or your own peace of mind that you haven't caused harm. But of course, it isn't worth it from a much wider perspective as well. You don't want to be the person living for the rest of your life with the knowledge that you caused the death or serious injury of somebody on our roads.
Yeah, and I think what you've said there is really key to my next question, which is, certainly having experienced some of this where, little Jimmy will be saying to mum, but mum, I haven't taken anything. How do we check that, what the test comes back is actually accurate? What processes are there to reassure people that actually an innocent person is not going to end up before the court and found guilty of something so dreadful as drug driving if they're innocent?
Yeah, so look, we won't turn this into an exchange and a lecture on all of the police procedure. If you're unfortunate enough to be involved in something like this, no doubt your solicitor will advise you of all of that. But what I can assure people of is, look, the indications at the roadside are simply the first step, the gateway through to wider testing. And all of that testing is done in a really robust manner. And it's done in a robust manner that is evidenced and has been proven in court. You'll be provided with copies of what is taken. You'll be provided with an opportunity, if it's blood, etc., to have a sample for your own solicitor to have a look at. And what I can assure anybody listening to this is, look, the United Kingdom legal system is one of the finest in the world, and it has all of the checks and balances in place that are needed. If you indicate at the side of the road, it is simply that. It is an indication, and you will go on then to further evidential tests. Those evidential tests are undertaken in very strict circumstances, and there's continuity of evidence all the way through. And whenever something does eventually get in front of the court, it means not only has the evidence been produced, but the Director of Public Prosecutions, their lawyers have had an opportunity to have a look at it, make sure that the case is fit for purpose, it's watertight. Your defence solicitor will have done exactly the same long before it ever gets to court. So, Alan, the chances of you getting to court and, as you say, little Jimmy saying it wasn't me, what did it? Those cases just don't happen. By the time it gets to that stage, all of the checks and balances will have made sure that this case is absolutely right for prosecution.
Okay. So, I suppose what message would you give to lawful road users who are going to be out and about across the festive period soon? What advice would you give to them about staying safe and actually not involving or becoming involved in road incidents?
Okay, so look, There's a number of things that are all common sense. So at this time of the year, it's darker, it's wetter, there's less traction on the road. So the first and most basic one is just make sure that you and your vehicle are roadworthy and capable of being on the road safely in the first place. It's amazing that even with modern technology, Alan, the amount of people we see on a frosty morning driving with condensation on the inside of the window, driving without the vehicle's windows and mirrors being properly cleaned. It's just unbelievable that people would take that chance to venture onto the roads that are dangerous enough anyway with their vehicle in that condition. So make sure you and your vehicle are fit for purpose. If you do know somebody that's drinking and driving, report them. Let us know about it. Or if you're not prepared to do that, at least save a life, intervene and stop them from getting into the vehicle. But of course, whilst this is focused on drink and drug drive, there's a much wider perspective in relation to what we would call the fatal four. So the amount of people, Alan, on our roads at the minute that are still not wearing seatbelts is unbelievable. And we know that where seatbelts are involved, they absolutely save lives. What we call distracted driving, another one of the fatal four, predominantly it's relating to the use of handsets and mobile phones. The amount of people involved in using mobile phones, that temptation to pick it up, to look at it when you're driving, thinking it'll be fine just this one time, just don't. It only takes a split second. Whenever you get into a vehicle, get it onto your hands-free. If you have that, put the mobile phone in the glove box, get it out of sight, out of mind. There's an interesting media piece out at the minute that says that the only screen time you should have in a vehicle is the windscreen time. So look out the window. If that was your driving test you were doing where you're being assessed in your driving, you certainly wouldn't drive with your mobile phone anywhere near you. So why would you do it when the outcome is much worse than failing a driving test? It's the potential to take the life of somebody else on our road. So we've got the seatbelts, we've got the mobile phone, speeding. Look, we know there are millions of people still caught, even with the reduction in policing and with quite a lot of the camera network in the United Kingdom not being what it should be. There are still millions of people caught speeding every single year in the United Kingdom. And of course, again, people think this is a victimless crime, but I would urge people to remember that speed limits are there for a reason, and especially at this time of the year around schools and other areas where it's vulnerable. 20 miles per hour limits are coming in more and more in the United Kingdom. You won't be surprised, or you might be surprised, Alan, to hear that I was doing 20 miles per hour past a school the other morning, and this school bus was right up my tail. So even the driver in a bus with children on board, who the speed limit is there to protect, was wanting to push me down the road faster. So remember about the speed limit. And of course, we touched on the drink and drug driving. And of course, the other one that isn't one of the fatal four, but road rage. So at this time of the year, traffic jams, trying to move around the country quickly, journeys being delayed for whatever reason. And then we see incidents of road rage. So just remember, I keep coming back to a point, Alan, that is something that is a societal issue in the United Kingdom. Driving on our roads is not a right. It is a privilege. And it is a heavily regulated privilege, and it's heavily regulated because every 17 minutes somebody is killed or seriously injured. And therefore, you should respect the privilege that is yours of being allowed to be licensed to be legally on our roads. And therefore, if you drive the way you would drive if somebody, your nearest and dearest, was in beside you and you had to look after them, and if you drive that way, and drive defensively, make sure that you get home at the end of your journey, make sure that everybody else gets home at the end of the journey, then perhaps this Christmas, as opposed to others, there can be fewer of those empty seats around the table.